traveler to Zombie Town, where it's time to celebrate another vaguely spooky Halloween.
Hail to the king, baby! I am Derek, and joining me as always, good, bad, he's the guy with the science. Hello, Jim, the mad scientist.
I got a whole Erlenmeyer flask. I don't know what's in it.
That's scary. And the word that best describes our guest this week is groovy. Please welcome Sierra.
Thank you. I don't understand the reference, but I like that I'm being called groovy.
That's good. Probably better that way. And we have assembled here in Zombie Town with the Necronomicon in tow to summon the spirit of Spooky Dave from the world beyond. So let me just say the magic words here. Klaatu Barada.
Excuse me. Hi. I'm Spooky Dave.
I didn't say every single tiny little syllable, but I basically said them.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
You said a combination of syllables.
So this is the terrifying show where we answer the most haunting audience-submitted questions in a manner that we like to call vaguely spooky. But before we do that, it's time for Jim's frightening science fact of Halloween. Jim?
Great. Vampire bats are only about 7 inches long, and they don't suck the blood out of their prey. They make a little cut in the prey's skin with their teeth, and then they just lap it up with their tongues. It's kind of cute, except it's, drinking blood, so...
And then they turn other people into vampire bats.
No, that's also wrong.
Well, that's disappointing.
That is kind of disappointing.
So when you say long, do you mean like their wingspan? Or
No,
is that
like
wide?
head to toe, like.
What's their wingspan?
That I don't know, but it's probably proportionally about that. It's certainly not like 3 feet.
An animal that does suck blood, and there are actually vampires in other parts of the world that are more based on these than they are bats, are mosquitoes.
Those are also scary in Halloween.
They're very spooky.
Google says 8 inches, the wingspan.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's not much bigger than 7 inches.
I have to Google it.
Well, with our fun science fact out of the way, perhaps we should move on to our first Halloween question. Question 1 this week. Why are people so fascinated with serial killers?
Oh, I'm so excited about this. I'm fascinated by serial killers.
I take it Sierra is fascinated by serial killers.
Yes. Yep. I watch all the horror movies, all the documentaries. Yes, I'm very, very into it.
I just want to say in my notes, I titled this segment Serial Killers, but spelled cereal like breakfast cereal, and I didn't do that on purpose. I just noticed it now.
Is that not what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, we did talk about Batman fighting cereal a few episodes back.
Okay, I maybe did like the wrong research.
It's all about Boo Berry.
Yeah, which cereal did you do research on?
Well, mostly like Tricks and Lucky Charms and like how the kids have like really homicidal tendencies towards the mascots because they want the cereal. So there's a motive.
God, I haven't had Tricks in like 15 years.
Yeah, Tricks are for kids.
They are for kids. Well, I guess I will dive in here where I started with this research, because the why are people fascinated with serial killers kind of rang to me as like, why are people interested in horror in general?
Yeah.
So I have a couple places to go with this, so we'll see what happens. But so one of the things, a literary study of horror, and this is oversimplifying like crazy, and there's so many ways you could talk about this topic. But one of the interesting things that I was reading about is horror tends to let people talk about things that make us uncomfortable in a way that distances us from those things.
Okay.
So like a lot of interest in people like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, who are serial killers, but they're somewhat supernatural and they're fictional, is it turns it into sort of like a morality play. And it allows us, we see there's a clear bad guy and clear good guys, and we know good versus evil. And this allows us to kind of see this morality play without having to worry about real life. It's still sort of a form of escapism. And that kind of translates into another famous one that I looked up was Jack the Ripper, who was a real person. But since nobody knows who he was, and it was such a long time ago, it still kind of is a myth. It's still kind of like this fictional devil character. But that kind of all falls apart when you start to look at, like, people are also really interested in true crime podcasts. And like, we know real people who are legit human beings who have done these things. So that's kind of where I started.
Well, I was looking up kind of like the psychology behind it, and it kind of related back to what you were saying. Is the one article that I pulled up was saying that it relates back to our fascination with predators, which totally relates back to what you were saying about kind of knowing the good guy versus the bad guy. Because when, a cheetah is chasing a gazelle, I don't know if that's the correct location, if that's actually the predator. But
I think cheetahs chase gazelles. I think that's a
think
thing.
so too.
You're right, yeah.
So, but you know who the good guy and the bad guy is. You know that the cheetah is going to kill the gazelle and the gazelle is helpless. And we kind of know that clearly in our minds. But I also think it goes back to like the psychology of it and like just wondering why predators are the way they are. Like why, and I think that's why it's gotten so intense with the documentaries. Is like I was watching Dahmer, and like we were talking about earlier before we started recording, is that they were talking on the show about how he had this. They were talking about the psychological term for sexual pleasure derived from human organs. And like, that's way more intense than, documentaries or horror movies were like 20 years ago. And I think our fascination with the psychology behind it has only grown.
And I mean, it's kind of, to me at least, it's in the same way that humans like to do things that are extreme, like thrill-seeking activities like roller coasters and skydiving and like bungee jumping. It's a way to be scared while still being perfectly safe. So reading about a serial killer can be scary and it can be unsettling and it can be disturbing, but you personally are perfectly safe. You're hiding behind your computer screen or your television set, not in any danger, but you still feel the intensity of that. Sort of like, a roller coaster, you're going to be safe 99 times out of 100, hopefully more than that actually, but you get my meaning there.
Well, personally, that's why I like horror movies, because I'm not a huge... I'll do most roller coasters, but like I get so scared of heights and like I can't do like bungee jumping. I like won't do it. So I'm like, I would prefer to watch like The Conjuring or something than go bungee jumping.
So while horror lets us kind of explore those things that... Because we all have this kind of morbid curiosity, like most... That's a pretty natural human thing. But... horror lets us explore those things from a point of view of safety. It's still, in horror movies specifically, they get our adrenaline running the same way that like a roller coaster might. But the idea of like actual serial killers, you talked about psychology. There is a psychological fascination because fiction allows us to explore the human psyche in like villains, but if they are fictional, they aren't necessarily doing something believable. And knowing that a real person thought about this and exploring what went through their head when they did it, that's a way to like kind of explore how can the dark parts of a human brain actually manifest, I guess.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier about the Chris Watts case, which is not super well known, but there's a documentary about it on Netflix and I think a few others. Christopher Watts was a totally normal guy who was having an affair. Well, I guess that's not totally normal, but a little more normal than murdering your wife. And he, instead of, divorcing his wife and going off with his girlfriend, like I feel like any, normal human would do, he murdered his wife who was pregnant with their son and then his 2 young daughters. And that's just, I feel like when they were doing the documentary, they were talking to all these people. And I think the fascination behind it and the scary part of it is that he was seen as such a normal guy. Like Jeffrey Dahmer was kind of a weirdo, but Christopher Watts was like a good looking, fit guy who like nobody ever expected to do this. And so that I think was the main fascination behind it. And I think the fascination behind a lot of those murders where people just do it out of nowhere. They're seemingly totally normal people otherwise.
One thing that I always find interesting about this is just like, I could never imagine myself doing anything like this. So to see that another human being is capable of that is intriguing to me in a way, because it's like, I can't even wrap my head around what they would be contemplating in their head as like the lead up to whatever they do. You know what I mean?
Well, good to know. Yeah, it's fascinating and super scary at the same time.
Well, so that kind of gets to another point that I looked up, because true crime podcasts are the most popular podcasts, like that people listen to, and that kind of gets the same. Like, my question is why, and that's sort of why is horror interesting? Why do people find true crime interesting? And it kind of seems like a lot of it is to do with the fact that we like mysteries. And the reason we like mysteries, people like to, one, be able to figure things out, but also if there's something you don't understand, we get a satisfaction from learning the answer to a question. So this possibly explains why we're fascinated with like Jack the Ripper, because we don't know the answer to who that was or all these lingering questions. But then you get into people that we've mentioned a few names of people who we know quite a bit about, and we know for sure that they were the ones who committed these crimes. So where's the mystery? And that kind of gets to what that is. The mystery is now a psychological one. We don't understand how could somebody actually do this stuff that we can't imagine ourselves doing. And that's why we want to explore their psyche and continue to learn more and more about how their brain worked.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing to, these murderers that have confessed and we know that it's them, to try to understand them or, analyze their brain, or if they're still alive, question them and see why. But I think it becomes a problem in like cases like JonBenet Ramsey, where we don't know, and then we forget that there are real people involved that maybe are still trying to forget and deal with this. And then, people are still trying to figure out who it was and get into it, which I agree, it's fascinating, but, there's cases where there's still real people involved in this.
The word bad taste is thrown around a lot. I know there was a recent controversy with the series Dahmer that is pretty popular right now, that people just think that it is in bad taste because there were people connected to that case still living today. So I don't really have a comment on that one way or the other, except that I find it interesting.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to have to, it would be, well, I don't even know how they might feel, but to have to live that and then be involved in something that famous and that traumatizing and then have to relive it when people are interested in it and creating documentaries and creating TV shows. And I can't imagine how they feel, whether they're, still trying to deal with the trauma or, I have no idea.
There's a differentiation I wanted to make, because you mentioned in the one case, somebody's like a good looking guy. And I don't think you meant this by that comment, but there have been historical murderers who like famously people thought were really attractive. There were
Mhm.
there is somebody I can specifically think of that I heard someone say that person couldn't have killed all these people because they're so handsome. I'm like, I hate that that's what you think.
That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
But it kind of, so there's a differentiation I wanted to make between being interested in the idea of serial killers and people like romanticizing them, which is something that happens. I remember when Dexter was really popular, and Michael C. Hall became one of the most attractive men in the country because of Dexter. And it was like, they don't like Dexter though, do they? Like, he's a bad guy. I don't know.
I've never seen Dexter.
Yeah, I haven't either. I feel like many people are probably just attracted to the actor, but there are definitely people that romanticize serial killers. And you have, I guess, what you would call handsome privilege. And then there's also, with cases that happened in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of white privilege for these white male serial killers, that they got away with things that maybe they wouldn't have gotten away with if they weren't white.
The other thing about Dexter, though, is that if I understand correctly from like the 3 sentences of knowledge I have about this show, is that he's supposed to be sort of an anti-hero, right? So he's like killing serial killers or killing other killers or something.
Well, yeah, that's the premise of the show.
Yeah, which is not to say that's a great thing to do, but at least he's not killing innocent people. I don't know. I assume that's how the show is written.
Maybe that's why he's more romanticized.
So in 1974, they did a study. Donald Dutton and Arthur Aaron did a study to test the causation of the misattribution of arousal. They did this study where basically it was they would have people cross this this bridge, and it was this suspension bridge, and they had 2. They had a suspension bridge and like a sturdy bridge, and one would be scary, and then the other one wouldn't be. And so they would have like men cross the bridge, and then after they crossed the bridge, they'd be stopped. They had them greeted by a specific person, like an attractive person and an unattractive person. And they would have them talk about their experience. And I'm oversimplifying, but I heard about this study from a friend, and basically more men tended to. Oh, here's what it was. They would get like their numbers out. Well, basically, they sort of just measured like their attraction to the people greeting them at the end of the bridge, and the Spark Notes is there was like a correlation between how dangerous or how scary it was and how attracted to the person at the end there was.
Yeah.
Like how attracted they were. And I think the idea is that humans tend to misattribute arousal to fear, basically. Like fear is like a turn on, sort of. So like with Dexter, for instance. Now Dexter, I think, that is a work of fiction, and they intentionally sexualize him in the narrative. Like whenever he is talking about murdering people or actually murdering people, it talks about his primal need to do it. It uses language that is intentionally like adjacent to sexuality. Like even I think that at some point they explore his sexuality and they kind of like connect it to his need to kill. And so that's something that the narrative does on purpose, but that's part of it. I mean, that's part of the human fascination with like death and fear. I mean, like, people get together with other people because they're afraid of being alone. Fear is a big motivator in humans.
Yeah.
Well, that's why the trope of taking a date to a scary movie.
Right. Yeah. Cause they'll cling on to you. And then I think one of the issues with people like thinking, oh, that guy's too cute to like, there's sort of, it's that degree of separation. They feel safe because they don't really acknowledge the reality of it. It's like, oh, that person wouldn't do it because he's cute. Well, that's a real person. That's not a Dexter. That
Right.
happened. Real
Mhm.
people, and people, I think, because it's like on the internet or it's on TV, they don't really internalize that. Like they know it intellectually, but they don't.
Yeah.
I wonder if you're saying that, fear is a sexual stimulant for some people. I wonder if, I'm sure that serial killers derive sexual pleasure from all kinds of different areas, but I wonder if the fear of getting caught is part of that.
I think wasn't there, didn't Howard Stern have somebody call in and he was like a
Yeah,
guy
that's
who was a serial killer and he claimed to be a serial killer anyway?
That's a fascinating story that like they never solved. But yeah, on the Howard Stern show, somebody called in and Howard Stern thought that it was a joke, so he was like making fun of the guy, and then this guy, he just like real casually started describing like, yeah, I've killed people, like
the Storyville Slayer.
Yeah,
he called in and talked about how he did it, and Howard Stern just would like ask him like, well, why do you do it? Tell us about it. He would kill sex workers and
jeez, oh man,
and stuff.
I listened to that segment because I thought it was interesting, and you can hear at the beginning of the interview, at the beginning of the call, Howard Stern is like joking, making fun of him like he always does, and then like by the end, there's like everyone is really quiet, and they're just like, please tell us more, but also please stop doing this.
Like, stay on the line, we'll get you.
Yeah. And like, I think Howard Stern ended up telling him like, you should stop it. Like, turn yourself in. Where are you? Can we call the police? And he was like, I mean, you're not going to catch me. And it was like chilling. Like it was a real thing.
Wow. That's a lot of confidence for a serial killer.
That's like, people are, I think, more fascinated with the serial killers that have been caught because they're safe.
Yeah.
Like the reality is there's people out there now and we don't know who they are, and like, that's fascinating, but it's not like, ooh, I want to understand the psychology. It's more like, ooh, I want to hope that I never run into that person.
Yeah.
Well,
that's like legit fear versus like psychological interest, which is what we have in the former, I guess.
I see. Yeah.
I guess moving aside from the whole serial killer trope, why then do you think that people are so interested in other arenas of horror? Like, something that's really popular nowadays is, I guess you would call it like religious horror, where like it's based off of like, demons, and there's usually the Catholic churches involved and stuff like The Conjuring.
Well, it's because biblically accurate angels are awesome.
Well, I remember when I don't remember this because it happened before I was born, but I remember learning that when The Exorcist came out, people were kind of over slasher films and they were over horror films because they were like, it's all fake, and we've, as a society, have grown and learned, have a cultural awareness. So when they made The Exorcist, it was like, yeah, that vampires and werewolves are fake, but a lot of people believe in demonic possession. So when The Exorcist came out, it was like, here's a thing that you think could be real, and it's just now deal with that.
Yeah.
I mean, religious fear has always been a big part of horror. Even vampires. Vampires is super Catholic, like the original stories of them. And like part of the horror of vampires was not only that they are dead and they come and they drink your blood and stuff, but it was like this idea that they're damned and they'll, they're able to still do evil even though they're dead, they're still a monster that can get you,
Well, this seems like a good place to leave off for now, but there's definitely a lot we could talk about. So listeners, let us know what you think. In the meantime, let's move on to our second question for Halloween this year.
Sorry. I turned the page and I remembered that the thing I wrote at the top of this section of my notes is, am I a chimera?
Oh, okay. Question 2 this week is, how many monsters can you be at the same time?
I got a hot take on this one.
Yeah. Well, I have a question first that may be shorter than your hot take. So Are monsters that kill people, like werewolves, vampires, etc., considered serial killers? And if so, are they considered multiple monsters?
Ooh.
Whoa. So is a serial killer, is that one box that is checked? Is that the question?
Well, does a serial killer have to be a human, I guess? Maybe is the
Following
question.
that, I feel like I don't really understand this question at all. It's like, what does that mean? How many monsters can you be? Like, would are there multiple? Like, if you're an army of clones, I guess.
That was a note I was going to make. Technically, the answer is one.
That was what I was going to say.
Is that your hot take, Jim?
Yeah. Well, because here's the thing. Like, if you think about like a hippogriff, for example, I think hippogriffs are what, eagle and horse.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's two animals merged together into one thing, but we just call that a hippogriff. That's like its own thing. So like if you had like a Gila monster and a horse combined together, that would be its own thing. That would be one monster. If you had like a crocodile and a centipede attached together somehow, that would be one monster. So you can be one monster.
You can be one monster.
If you're physically one monster.
That's not to say that we have to stop talking about how many different parts you can cram into one organism. Yeah. I think that's more compelling.
I mean, you could talk about, because like army of clones.
Oh, that's true.
Like who's you? See, that's that's the other part you have to define. There's like the monster plural versus singular, but there's also what is the you. You know, I mean, like, is you your mind? Are there different aspects? Like, can you be multiple people? I mean, like, what about like
like the Borg?
Like the Borg, or just even like, I don't know, like dissociative identity disorder, you know, like multiple personalities, that kind of thing. Like, I mean,
that's what I like about this show, is that I didn't expect either of these things.
Are we using the term monster as like a descriptor, though? Because you can be like a scientist and a musician at the same time. You know what I mean? That's a descriptor word. So I guess you could be if you're using the term monster as a descriptor, but if you're like a physical monster, just like a physical human, you can't be like two humans at the same time.
Here's the way I did it, and but I love that this is not the way anyone else apparently did it. I decided, can you be, just the first three that come off the top of my head, can you be a Frankenstein, a vampire, and a werewolf at the same time?
Oh.
And yes, I know Frankenstein is not the name of the monster, but I am going to do it anyway, so don't worry about it.
I mean, I think the answer to that is yes, but I think that becomes its own category of thing. So you're just like one unique monster.
Well, that's what I get. Like, my interpretation of the question is how many kinds of monster boxes can you check if they ask you what kind of monster are you?
The one that I wrote down was the Loch Ness Monster as a vampire.
I feel like I'm not a medical professional, but you would have to analyze, like, because taking your examples, like a werewolf and a vampire, you would have to analyze the blood of each one. My experience with like vampires comes from like Twilight, and I know that like they talked about the blood is different, like in that movie in particular, which is its own like world. I think the werewolves are like warm all the time. They're warm-blooded, and then the vampires are cold-blooded. So could you be both? Because the internal workings are different. I guess it depends on what world you're in.
So like, yeah, I mean, speaking of worlds though, like this question it's so big, because if you look at like the ancient Egyptian concept of the soul, like they had different parts of like a soul, you know, a soul, and like what we call a soul would be like maybe a mind or if you're a spiritual person might say a spirit or something. Like, so like the answer to this question depends on the nature of the universe. Like, is dualism a thing? Is idealism a thing? Is materialism a thing? Like, which is the thing? Because like there would be different answers depending on which model of the universe you're going with. But like, for instance, the Egyptians said, oh, there's the Ket. And I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but I'm just looking at a list. There's the Ket, which is the physical body. And then there's the Sa, the spiritual body, the Ren, which is your name, the Ba, which is your personality, the Ka, which is your vital essence, the Ib, which is your heart, and the Shut or the shadow, the Sekhem, which is the power form. Now, and then like, so if you take all these different things, you could say that your body is a Frankenstein monster, and your your spiritual body is like like a ghost maybe, which is kind of like a monster or a poltergeist or something. And then your heart or something could have to do with your blood, and you could be a vampire. So like because like that's the thing is like you isn't one thing. There's all these things come together to make you. So you could be multiple monsters because all of these different monsters make up you.
I wonder if when I thought about trying to compile, I looked at things you can turn into, like you can get bitten by a vampire and turn into a vampire. You can get cursed and turned into a werewolf. Like so I'm kind of backpedaling to get on to Dave's point here. So like if I were to say, instead of how many monsters could you be, if I were to say something like, could a zombie also be a vampire? Would that change the question, I guess?
I mean, I think that's just like sort of defining like, well, what makes something a vampire versus a zombie? Because like you could argue that all vampires are zombies because zombies are just undead people. I
wrote in my notes that vampire cancels out zombie.
But can't you kill a vampire? Like you cut off its head or something?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I think you can. And then there's different ways to kill zombies than vampires.
I mean, that's the other thing is all of these things have so many different rules that you can make up if you want.
But also, like, you could look at the Egyptian thing and just like the old trope of like, okay, so a zombie is just kind of like a brain dead thing. So like you could be, if you like took your kind of like ego like if you took your whole essence apart, you could make monsters with different parts of yourself. You could take your brain and put it in a jar and make a jar robot.
Oh, okay.
Like a brain jar robot, like in Fallout. And then the brainless zombie is a zombie. That's the rest of your body. And then like your ghost is a ghost, and that's a whole other thing. And they were all you, but now they're all these different things. You've branched into different monsters.
Good point.
Well, that's interesting because another point I made was another point I wrote down in my notes was I don't think you could be both a Frankenstein and a mummy, because a Frankenstein, I'm just doing this now on purpose to make people mad. A Frankenstein is a person made up of an entire collection of body parts, whereas a mummy has all of its organs taken out of it.
Oh, well, what if you take all the organs out of the mummy to make a Frankenstein?
Whoa. I didn't think of that. Yeah,
mummy and zombie can't be the same, but you could be like a mummy.
Aren't mummies just rich zombies?
They're just rich old. Well, they're not all rich. It depends on the culture.
Oh, that's a good point. Suppose. Yeah, you're right. Actually, a question I have as a follow-up to this is: are there any monsters that are mutually exclusive? Like I know that you were saying earlier about like, oh well, this and this cancel out, but are there any that are like really very incompatible
with everything else?
For me, it depends on the order in which, because like I don't think you, who the proverbial you, whoever is listening to this,
me personally,
I don't. So Jim, I don't think you personally can become a Frankenstein, because once that body is animated, it's a new being, according to Mary Shelley anyway. But you, Jim, could be mummified and then come back as a mummy.
Yeah.
So it depends what you start as. And in any case, you could always get cyborg parts, learn magic and become a witch, and get trapped in a lamp and become a genie.
Now, does it count if I have like my arm cut off and that goes into the Frankenstein monster?
Well, that gets to Dave's point. Like, does that count as you? It's a part of you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you die and you're an organ donor, are you the people that get your organs too?
Okay, that's too real.
I would argue no.
It's like Dahmer would be interested in that.
I bet he would.
Oh boy.
I mean, I think like so Frankenstein's monster is kind of weird, just because like, I mean, besides the the classic depiction of him with the bolts in the neck and the big platform shoes and how
The
he's
universal
usually
picture, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he's really only a monster because of his origin. Like, he has like an unnatural beginning to his life. Like, he's not
Aren't
born,
all
he is
monsters
created.
that?
Victor Frankenstein is the real monster.
Right. But like, I mean, that's the thing is like, nobody could become a Frankenstein monster because like a Frankenstein monster is what he is because of how he was created. He wasn't anybody
Right.
before that. But like, so he's not, I think like sort of one of the points of Frankenstein is that he's not really a monster. He's just a guy,
Yeah.
but like, he's a monster because of how he came to be. So there's, that kind of goes back to like, what is a monster? Like, how are we defining that?
Sure.
I think we're leaning more towards like you guys said, the classic monster trope rather than like a mental monster, like a serial killer.
Well, yeah, but like Frankenstein's monster kind of bridges that
Yeah.
because he's not really, and there's nothing monstrous about him after he's sort of established as a person. I think he's maybe strong. Maybe he's really strong.
He's really
like,
strong.
He's just a really strong guy, though. He's big and
just a
strong.
really
Yeah.
strong guy.
Like
Well-
there's normal guys who are big and strong.
I mean, to Sierra's point, I mean, that's definitely where I started, but
Yeah.
I love that we've opened it up from there, though, because so like any of these things could then just go on a killing spree, and now they are a killer. Like, that's a monster. That's a kind of thing. And then I don't know, what else could you do if the Invisible Man counts as a monster? Then like whatever you have a Frankenstein monster was bitten by a vampire, who then gets a cyborg arm and an invisible serum, and now it's like all these things.
This is like a game of Munchkins.
This
gone
is
wrong.
Yeah.
yeah, that's what this is. Yeah. I mean, and then Jim's point, that's still just one thing. Like, it's one entity.
Yeah, I think the question wasn't how many entities can you be. In my mind, when I read the question, I was like, oh, how many different types of, well, we could have gone the two ways. How many different types of psychological monster could you be versus could you be a vampire and a werewolf? But I wasn't thinking of it as how many different entities can you be, which is, I think, the way that you guys went with it too.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
I think you probably read it the way it was intended to be read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just took apart the whole question
You're
because I'm
pushing
an
the
idiot,
box.
and
No, that was
just-
great. I
Just
loved it.
decided to wreck everything.
I was like, hey, let's deconstruct this question as a concept to avoid answering it.
To avoid it.
I don't know. I really liked that because it was a way to like. To me, I felt like you were also trying to figure out how many different ways you could take your body and soul and split them amongst monsters.
Yeah, Dave, your answer was a lot smarter than mine. Thanks.
I disagree. I think mine was much dumber, but
That's it's so dumb, it's genius.
Welcome to Vaguely Scientific.
Well, one of the things that I
are we
really
smart?
like about
Are we dumb? Nobody knows.
No, nobody knows. You can make a case for both. I like that because one of the things I know some people that I feel like if I were to bring up just can you be a vampire and a werewolf at the same time, I know a few people that would say no because they're at war or something. And I love that we just deconstructed this whole idea that there's no real answer to that.
Who's at war?
Yeah, are
Vampires versus werewolves.
in
What?
where? In
Everywhere.
Twilight? What?
In
Twilight,
Twilight,
Underworld.
Yeah, but there is one
I don't
in
know
Underworld.
Underworld.
That's like the whole point of the Underworld movie.
That's what I'm saying is that example was too specific, I guess. My point was there are going to be people who apply their rules to the fiction.
From
that-
specific like movies.
Right,
rules.
right.
Yeah.
And we've just said, none of those matter, which is great.
I like how a lot of people just kind of assume that vampires and werewolves do not get along at all.
Yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't.
I feel
get
like
along.
they have a lot in common. I
mean, Dave, have you ever seen Twilight? Come on.
I like was in a room that was the first movie was playing. But I was not really paying attention. I remember there was baseball, and
What?
then I remember that, and then like there was because they played baseball. I got that, and then like there was like a guy attacking somebody in a room, and I was like, "Who's that guy?" And I didn't know who it was because I was kind of in and out.
It kind of falls into that category of like so bad that it's good. You know,
Yeah.
those movies where you're like, I'll just turn this on in the background because it's stupid
Right.
and it's
For
fun
me,
to
it was
watch.
more like this is not holding my attention, so I don't know if it's good or bad. But I liked the baseball part. That's the only part I remember.
I like watching people on TikTok redo scenes from Twilight. That's great.
Like I would play baseball if I was a vampire. And if I was a werewolf, I think I'd probably go like soccer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I feel like they're like soccer guys.
I want to see
like-
them both race each other on a track.
So how many sports could you play as all
New
the
question.
different monsters?
Now, I think the vampires would have the edge on the track, but werewolves would be like all about cross country.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're outdoorsy.
That's the least hot take ever.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, calling them like I sees them.
What about the shot put?
What about the shot put?
Well,
Yeah.
werewolves don't really have arms, so that's a hard one.
They don't have arms?
Well, it depends on the canon because some of them are bipedal, some of them are quadrupeds. So
That's true, yeah. Like in Harry Potter, it like well, I guess I'm trying to think of. I haven't seen that Harry Potter movie in a while where they have the werewolf. It's like hairless, which is weird.
yeah.
And then it like stands up, but then it's like on its hind legs. I don't know. I feel like most movies that I've seen with werewolves they look like dogs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, because the name werewolf makes you
Yeah.
think it must be lupine.
Mhm.
But that was a point I wanted to make. There's no order to this anymore. But when thinking about vampires turning into werewolves, like a lot of vampires can already turn into a bunch of different animals.
Mhm.
But then I kind of had this thought that werewolf, and we've talked about this before, werewolf doesn't necessarily mean wolf. It just means a person that transforms into a monster.
Mhm.
But pretty much always they're depicted as wolfy.
Yeah.
Wolves are scary.
You know, you think wolves are scary, but we like bred them and now they sleep in our homes. So
Now they're dogs.
now they're dogs.
Well, dogs aren't scary, but like, I mean, if I was out in the woods and there was wolves after me, I'd be pretty scared. I mean, they'll get you.
Somebody at some point was like, nah, these are cute and like tamed it. And now we have dogs.
Yeah. I'm not generally scared of the tame ones.
Hmm.
Mm.
Although one time there was like one that bit me and I didn't particularly like that one. It wasn't mine.
Mm.
It was like just a dog on a chain. I was walking by and the chain was not short enough. And the dog,
Oh,
it got me. It would like, I was like, oh, that
Oh.
dog's not going to get me. It's on a chain, but its chain was longer than I thought it was. And it like got me right on the thigh. And I was like, this dog just bit me.
oh my God.
Yeah. And it was like the person its owner was sitting on the porch watching this happen. I was like, your dog just bit me. And they were like, and they just kind of like stared at me. And I was like, all right. And I didn't do anything about it. I just left. But
You could have sued for so much money.
I guess I could have, but it's probably past the statute. I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to the dog though.
Yeah.
That's always been my stance because it's rarely the dog's fault.
Yeah, we have a dog that we adopted she's almost 9 now, so she's an old lady now. But we got her when she was 6, and they were like, yeah, she's fine with humans, which for the most part she is. She gets weird around, like, you know, certain men, which I'm like, oh, what did you do? Who did you kill that my dog doesn't like you? But, like, it's other dogs. She gets really aggressive, and now they were totally fine, but they will see her like on Instagram and stuff, and they're like, oh my God, she's a totally different dog. I'm like, yeah, she's inside 24/7 and gets love and treats. And when dogs are really, really well taken care of and everything, I feel like turn into completely different beings.
Because they're werewolves.
Yeah. Although sometimes she's weird. Like we pulled up to a friend of my husband's a couple weeks ago and she was in the car and he's like, oh, is she nice? And yeah. And then she promptly like snapped at him and I was like, oops.
Oh, gee.
Just kidding. Not nice at all.
Sorry.
Actually. And neither am I. Ha ha ha.
It's nice as a woman, though. You have that protection. You're like, yeah, you don't know what my dog's going to do. Don't touch me.
Unpredictable.
Unpredictable. Well, listeners, this week, let us know what kind of... How many different monsters are you going to be? That's
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. Jim, do we have any listener mail?
We do. And as always, if you want to send us listener mail, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com. You can comment on our blog. You can like us on Facebook. You can tweet @VaguelySci. And this email comes to us from Kimmy and is in regards to episode... Oh, I didn't write it down. It was the one where we talked about... let me just pull it up. I have a website.
I'm going to pull up the website. Vaguely.
And is in regards to episode 105, Time Travel Isn't Worth the Effort. And Kimmy says, the global seed vault in Svalbard is actually a more complex operation than you'd think. Only the organization that deposits the seeds can withdraw them. They call it a black box setup, and it's kind of like a safety deposit box at a bank.
And this is for the purposes of storing seeds?
Yeah, after this, I ended up looking it up, and I guess that like there are a lot of different seed vaults all over the world, and a lot of them will like make copies of their own seeds and then put them in the Svalbard seed vault, which is like the biggest one of them all, and I guess is owned by Finland or like run by the Finnish government or something. I mean, it's not like anything shady or below board or anything, but it's just kind of like if you put the seeds in, then you're the ones allowed to take them out. It's not like there's just randomly giving out seeds to any old people. So, but that was pretty
I'm less
interesting.
interested.
Yeah, Evil Seed Corporation.
Evil Seed Corporation.
Well, thank you very much for that email. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, please email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and all the other great places that podcasts like to hang out. Subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
And if they come trick-or-treating, you can give them this podcast instead of candy.
Yeah, on like a flash drive
And your
or something.
house will get egged.
I don't think kids would like that.
I mean, they might like the ones where we talk about dinosaurs.
We do that
Oh, yeah,
sometimes.
maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd like this one about serial killers.
Yeah, probably not that one.
Don't stiff them on the candy, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily give this one to like a 4-year-old.
Now give them candy.
Yeah, give them candy. Unless they're allergic to candy, in which case give them like stickers or crayons or something. Anyway, our vaguely musical intro is composed by Anthony Pizzelli. And don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. Hey, for those favorite monsters of yours in your life, you could get them a Vaguely Scientific mug, because after drinking coffee, they'll be less monstrous.
Yeah. Nice save.
Yeah.
So thank you to Sierra and David for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite topics. So, what is this, my third time on being in the show?
Is it? I don't remember.
I think
I think
so.
it's a little more than that.
Third or fourth?
Really?
I think fourth.
Well, I always like coming back.
Yay.
Excellent.
I like doing the Halloween ones.
Yeah.
That's
It's like my thing.
good news. You're on the Halloween one.
Yay!
For Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
I'm Spooky Day.
Ah!
And I'm apparently Groovy Sierra.
Yay! Shop smart, shop S-smart. You got that?
Toodaloo, everyone.
Am I Spooky Dave?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Spooky Dave. No,
Who else?
I'm Spooky Dave.
I didn't
Sierra,
know.
Spooky Dave this year will be played by Sierra.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't know because it's Halloween, so
Yeah,
I could be Sierra for Halloween.
you could be Sierra for Halloween. That
Oh,
would be
please. And I'll be Dave.